On Thanksgiving morning, my son Marcus called and said, "Dad, maybe Noah should sit this one out." He didn't say autistic. He didn't say different. He said Noah, like his own brother's name, was simply an item on a checklist he needed to cross off before the guests arrived. I didn't argue. I took a long breath and said, "I understand." And I did understand every ugly, cowardly thing behind those 7 words. That afternoon, Noah and I had the quietest, most beautiful Thanksgiving of our lives. By midnight, I had 31 missed calls. I had no idea that the watercolor my son painted that afternoon would soon be seen by over 2 million people. The smell of sage and roasting garlic filled our little house on Delwood Drive that Wednesday evening. I stood at the kitchen counter listening to my son hum to himself in the next room, the way he always did when he was lost in something that mattered to him. Noah was 17 years old, 5 feet 10 inches of pure concentration, and he'd been awake since 6 that morning working on a new piece. His autism made the world loud and unpredictable sometimes, but when he painted, everything around him went soft and still. The brushes, the colors, the slow spreading of pigment across wet paper, these things made complete sense to him in a way that most of the world simply didn't. I leaned against the door frame and watched him for a moment without saying anything. He was working on a watercolor of the old maple tree in our backyard, the one my late wife Margaret had planted the year Marcus was born. In Noah's version, the tree was on fire with color, deep amber and rust, and gold bleeding into each other at the edges, the branches reaching outward like open arms. He'd been painting that tree for 3 years, a different version every autumn, and each one was more alive than the last. At 63, I'd learned to hold those moments gently. 3 years since Margaret passed, and it had been just Noah and me in this house in Columbus, figuring out the seasons together. Some days were harder than others, but evenings like that one, with the smell of sage in the air and my son humming something only he could hear, reminded me we were going to be fine. My phone buzzed on the counter. Marcus. I almost didn't answer. Holiday Eve calls from my older son usually meant logistics, and I'd already mentally settled us in for a quiet 2 days at home. But I picked up, "Hey, Dad." His voice had that particular flatness I'd come to recognize over the years, the careful, managed tone he used whenever the conversation was about to turn toward Noah. "Hey, son. You all ready for tomorrow?" "Yeah, about that." He paused just long enough to let me know the pause was intentional. "Courtney's parents are driving in from Charlotte, and her whole book club is coming. It's going to be a full house, Dad. Like, a really full house." I waited. Maybe Noah should sit this one out this year. Just, it might be a lot for him. Not it might be a lot for him. He meant it might be a lot for everyone else. He meant that Noah's occasional rocking, his bluntness, his habit of stating exactly what he observed, without filtering it through social courtesy, these things made Courtney's book club friends uncomfortable. He meant that it was easier to leave his brother home than to ask his wife's social circle to be decent human beings for 4 hours. I looked across the hallway at Noah, who had just added a streak of deep vermilion to the maple's highest branch, his whole body leaning forward with the effort of it. "I understand," I said quietly. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd get it. We'll do something after the weekend. Just us." "Just us." I set the phone on the counter and stood there for a moment listening to Noah hum. He looked up then, brush still in hand, and caught me watching him. His eyes were bright and unhurried, the way they always were when he'd been painting for a long stretch. "Dad, do you think Mom can see the maple from wherever she is?" My chest went tight. I walked over and stood beside him, looking at the painting. Every year he painted that tree like it was his way of speaking to her. "I think she can," I told him. "I think it's the first thing she looks for every November." He nodded seriously, satisfied, and turned back to his work. "We'll make our own Thanksgiving," I said, more to myself than to him. He didn't look up. "Can we have sweet potato pie?" "Absolutely." "Then that's a good Thanksgiving." By noon the next day, I'd made my decision. My son deserved a real holiday, not a consolation prize in his own living room. I'd heard our neighbor Ruth Calloway mention the community potluck at Eastside Lutheran Church, a Thanksgiving gathering for people who didn't have a big family dinner to go to. Senior citizens, young adults between jobs, a few international students from Ohio State who'd never had an American Thanksgiving. Real people, not a performance. I knocked on Noah's studio door. He'd converted the small sunroom off the back of the house with Margaret's blessing years ago, and he spent most of his days in there surrounded by watercolors and sketch pads and empty cups of tea he forgot to finish. "Get your coat," I told him. "We're going out for Thanksgiving." He looked up from his work. "Can I bring my sketchbook?" "Always." Ruth met us at the church door with a casserole dish in both hands and a smile that took up most of her face. She was 71 years old and had been our neighbor for 2 decades, and I trusted her completely. She looked at Noah with genuine warmth, not the polite, careful warmth people sometimes performed around him, but the real kind. "Noah," she said, "I've been hoping you'd come. I told everyone about your paintings." Noah shifted the sketchbook under his arm and looked at the people gathered inside, maybe 40 of them. Mismatched chairs and folding tables covered in potluck dishes, a cardboard turkey someone had made with children's handprints taped to the wall. He stayed close to my side for the first 10 minutes, absorbing the sounds and voices, recalibrating. But Ruth had a gift. She didn't rush him or draw attention to his adjustment. She simply pointed out the window to the large oak tree in the churchyard, its last leaves clinging to the branches in the gray November light. "That tree has been there since 1887, she told him. "I've always thought someone should paint it." Noah looked at the tree for a long moment. Then he found a chair near the window and opened his sketchbook. He started drawing while the rest of us served food and set out chairs and talked about the parade on television. People drifted past him naturally, glancing at his work with curiosity, and he answered their questions without looking up, short, direct answers that made people smile rather than feel dismissed. An hour in, he asked if anyone had watercolors. A woman named Dorothy, a retired art teacher from Clintonville, produced a travel watercolor set from her enormous purse with the triumphant air of someone who had been waiting their whole life for this exact moment. Noah accepted it with both hands and a thank you that sounded like something he'd been meaning to say for years. What happened next stopped the room. He painted that oak tree the way he painted everything, not as it looked, but as it felt. The November sky behind it deepened into layers of violet and gray and something close to green. The remaining leaves burned against the cold like small, defiant fires. He worked fast, with an assurance that made it look effortless, and somewhere around the 20-minute mark, people stopped eating. I watched from across the room. A woman in a yellow sweater pressed her hand to her mouth. 2 of the Ohio State students had their phones out. Dorothy, the art teacher, stood 3 feet behind Noah and did not move for 8 full minutes. When he set the brush down, the room was quiet for a moment, the way rooms sometimes go quiet after something unexpected and true has just happened. Then someone started clapping and the rest followed, and Noah looked up from the painting with an expression of mild surprise, as if he'd been somewhere else entirely and had just now returned. He smiled at Dorothy. "You have good brushes," he told her. She laughed and started crying at the same time. Ruth Calloway had been holding up her phone for the last 15 minutes of it. She posted the video that evening with a simple caption, "Grateful for neighbors. This young man painted this in 20 minutes and made every single person in this room feel something real. Happy Thanksgiving." By the time Noah and I got home and I'd washed the dishes and turned off the kitchen light, Ruth's post had 4,000 shares. I woke up at 6 the next morning to my phone buzzing steadily on the nightstand. By 7:30, I'd stopped counting notifications. Ruth's video had been shared to 3 different art communities on Facebook, then picked up by a page called Beautiful Humans that had 11 million followers. By noon, it had 800,000 views. By 4 in the afternoon, 2 million. People were writing things that made me sit down at the kitchen table and just hold my phone with both hands. "I'm an art teacher and I'm shaking," wrote someone from Vermont. "This boy has a gift that cannot be taught." "My daughter is autistic and she paints too," wrote a mother from Arizona. "I showed her this video 3 times and she keeps asking to watch it again." Someone in the comments had linked to a Columbus Dispatch article from 2 years earlier about a youth art show where Noah had entered a piece. The reporter had written 1 paragraph about him, buried at the bottom. Now that paragraph was being shared 10,000 times. Noah wandered into the kitchen around 9:30, completely unaware that 2 million strangers had watched him paint a tree. He poured himself cereal and asked if we had any orange juice. "We're out," I told him. "I'll get some today." He nodded and sat down and opened his sketchbook to a new page. He was already somewhere else, already listening to whatever it was inside him that told him what came next. "People liked your painting," I said carefully. He looked up. "The one at the church?" "Yes." "Good. Dorothy's brushes helped. He went back to sketching. I sat across from him and didn't say anything else. And I thought about my older son and his big house in Worthington, with his wife's book club friends and his careful, managed life, and I felt something complicated and sad and strangely free all at once. The calls from journalists started that afternoon. A lifestyle reporter from the Columbus Dispatch, a producer from an Ohio PBS affiliate, an art blog out of New York with 100,000 subscribers. I thanked each of them and said I needed time to think. That evening I sat with Noah after dinner and asked him something I needed to ask before anything else happened. Those people who watched you paint, they want to learn more about you. They want to write about your work and share your paintings. Before I say yes to any of that, I want to know how you feel about it. He thought about this with his full attention, the way he thought about everything. Will they be respectful? He asked. I'll make sure of it. Then it's okay. He looked at me steadily. Mom always said good things should be shared. I nodded. I had to look away for a second. 2 days later, my brother-in-law called to relay a message from Marcus, which told me everything I needed to know about how far my older son was willing to go. Apparently, Courtney had seen the video at her book club, several of the same women who'd sat at Thanksgiving dinner while Noah was home with sweet potato pie. They were calling it beautiful, remarkable. One of them had shared it to her own page, and it had gotten 1,000 likes in an hour. Marcus wanted to know if Noah would come to Courtney's mother's holiday charity auction in December. They were hoping he might do a live painting demonstration. Very low-key, just a small gathering, practically family. I put the phone down without calling back. I knew that dinner table. I'd sat at it. There was nothing low-key about it, and we were not, in any meaningful sense, practically family, not to the woman who had quietly suggested to my son that Noah's presence at Thanksgiving might be a problem. No, I thought. We're done performing for people who only call when there's something to gain. What I didn't know yet was that someone else had already decided to solve that problem for them. The coordinated attack started the second week of December, 8 days after Ruth's post had reached 3 million views, and 2 days after I'd politely declined 3 media interview requests in an effort to protect Noah's privacy and pace. It started as a trickle. Comments on Ruth's original post, then on the reshares, then on the PBS inquiry thread, all carrying the same language, same rhythm, same accusations. This man is exploiting his disabled son for internet fame. Where is Child Protective Services? Why isn't anyone asking whether this boy consented to being filmed? I recognized the language immediately. Not because it was cruel. Cruel comments are scattered and uneven. These were precise, repeated across platforms within hours of each other, posted by accounts created in the previous 2 weeks, using identical phrasing. Someone had drafted a script. Within 3 days, a Columbus TV station ran a segment. Local viral story raises questions about consent and special needs children. The reporter quoted 2 unnamed child welfare advocates who had concerns. The station had contacted my son Noah's former school without my knowledge. By the time I saw the segment, I already had a voicemail from Franklin County Children's Services requesting a home visit. I sat in the kitchen that evening after Noah went to bed, and I was honest with myself about what was happening. Someone who knew us, who knew our address, who knew which school Noah had attended, who had enough personal details to make the complaint sound credible, had decided that our happiness was a threat to something they wanted to protect. I thought about Courtney, who had social capital and professional relationships, and a perfectly maintained public image that had recently been quietly embarrassed by the viral video of the brother-in-law she'd suggested stay home for Thanksgiving. I'm not saying I knew for certain. I'm saying I knew. The Children's Services investigator came on a Tuesday. She was thorough and professional, and she spent 45 minutes in our home talking with Noah directly, asking him about his daily life and his feelings and his relationship with me. Noah answered every question with the same candid directness he brought to everything. He told her about his paintings, about Dorothy's brushes, about the oak tree at Eastside Lutheran. He told her I always asked his permission before sharing anything. She closed her notepad and looked at me. I don't see anything here that concerns me, she said. But I want you to know the complaint was detailed enough that I have to follow through with a written report. It may not be the last one. I was quiet for a moment. Can you tell me anything about where it originated? She couldn't. But she looked at me in a way that said she understood more than the paperwork allowed her to say. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The next morning I called Ruth. "I need your help," I told her. "I need to tell the real story. All of it." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been waiting for you to say that." I went live on Facebook that evening from our living room. I didn't have a plan or a script. I just turned the camera on myself and told the truth. I told it from the beginning. Thanksgiving morning, Marcus's phone call, the words, "Maybe he should sit this one out." I told it through Ruth's church and Dorothy's brushes and 2 million strangers who'd been moved to tears by my son's painting while his own family was arguing about whether his presence was appropriate. I told it all the way through to the coordinated complaint campaign and the children's services visit and what I believed about who had decided to make our joy into a liability. Noah was at the kitchen table behind me, sketching. Halfway through, he looked up at the camera, raised his hand in a small wave, and went back to his work. By the time I stopped talking, 38,000 people were watching live. The chat was moving too fast to read. "Your family should be ashamed. This man is a hero. Someone needs to check on that son of his. How do I buy one of Noah's paintings?" I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, the story had been picked up by 3 national outlets. The Thanksgiving detail, the brother's phone call, the sweet potato pie, the quiet house on Delwood Drive while Courtney's book club sat around a table saying how remarkable Noah's video was, had struck something deep and specific in people. It was too recognizable. Too many people had a version of this story in their own families. Marcus called at 7:15. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before. Something stripped back, less managed. "Dad, I'm listening." A long pause. "People from Courtney's office have been reaching out to her. It's gotten complicated." I waited. "I don't know what to say. I don't have the right words for this." "You don't need words right now," I told him. "You need to think about what kind of brother you want to be. Take your time." I hung up and poured myself a second cup of coffee and stood at the window looking at the backyard maple, bare now, its branches dark against the December sky. The Franklin County investigation was formally closed 11 days after it opened. No evidence of neglect, exploitation, or inappropriate conduct. The caseworker sent a brief letter. I kept it. It was Ruth who first suggested the road trip, characteristically practical, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a list she'd written on a legal pad. "There's a gallery in Pittsburgh that does open submissions in January," she said. "There's a First Friday Arts Walk in Philadelphia where street artists set up outside. And," she paused and pushed the legal pad toward me, "there's a juried exhibition at the Renwick Gallery in Washington in February. They accept emerging artists. Non-traditional applicants are welcome." I looked at the list. The Renwick Gallery was part of the Smithsonian. "Noah," I called. He appeared in the doorway, sketchbook in hand. "How would you feel about an adventure?" His face opened up. "What kind?" "The painting kind." He thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. "Can I bring my own brushes?" "You can bring everything you own." He went to pack before I'd finished the sentence. We left Columbus on a Wednesday morning in January, the Honda loaded with Noah's supply bags, my camera, a cooler of sandwiches, and a hand-drawn map Ruth had made because she didn't trust GPS in Pennsylvania hill country. Noah sat in the passenger seat with his sketchbook open in his lap, drawing the highway the way other people listen to music, not copying what he saw but translating it into something else entirely, the guardrails becoming brushstrokes, the overpass shadows becoming washes of blue-gray. Outside of Zanesville, he looked up from his drawing and said, "Dad, that truck has the same color as your old flannel shirt." I looked. A rust-red semi, sun-faded, doing 65 inches the slow lane. "It does," I agreed. He went back to his sketchbook. "I think I'll use that color in the next tree painting." I drove the rest of the way to Pittsburgh thinking about how my son moved through the world, how he collected colors the way other people collected memories, storing them somewhere precise and private until he needed them. Pittsburgh was good to us. A gallery in the Strip District hosted an open studio night and let Noah set up at a corner table. He painted the view from their window, the Monongahela River at dusk. The bridges lit up against the darkening sky while people with wine glasses in their hands stopped and watched and eventually pulled chairs over. A woman named Cecilia, a retired landscape architect who introduced herself by saying she had been looking at paintings for 50 years and could tell within 30 seconds whether something was alive, stood behind Noah for 20 minutes and didn't say a single word. When he finished, she touched his shoulder very gently and said, Young man, you see things other people have forgotten how to see. Noah looked at the painting and then at her. I'm just painting what's there, he said. That's exactly what I mean, she told him. I posted the Pittsburgh video that evening, Noah painting, the river behind him, Cecilia's face when he finished. In the caption I wrote, Night 1 of our painting journey. My son sees the world differently. Turns out, a lot of people needed to see it his way. 300,000 views by morning. Philadelphia gave us the Benjamin Franklin Parkway on a cold first Friday night. Street lamps throwing gold circles on the wet pavement, and other artists set up along the sidewalk with card tables and portfolio cases. Noah set up a folding table Ruth had packed for us and put out a small sign she'd made. Noah paints. Watch if you want. A crowd gathered within 15 minutes. He painted a woman's face, a stranger who stopped to look at his sketchbook, and who stayed when he asked quietly if he could paint her. She was in her 70s, white-haired, with a face that had lived in it completely, and Noah painted her with the same seriousness he brought to the maple tree and the river and the oak in the churchyard. He didn't flatter her or simplify her. He saw her exactly. When he turned the paper around to show her, she looked at it for a long time without speaking. You made me look like myself, she finally said. Noah seemed to consider this. You are yourself, he said. I just painted what I saw. She bought the painting for $40, the first painting Noah ever sold, and she folded the money carefully and handed it to him with both hands like it was something formal. Noah held it and looked at me. Dad, I earned money from painting. You did, son. He thought about this. I want to save it for something important. What's important to you right now? He considered. More brushes, and a plane ticket someday for Ruth. I managed to keep it together until I got back to the car. I didn't post everything from Philadelphia. Some of it I kept just for us, the woman with the lived-in face, the $40, the plane ticket for Ruth. Some things belonged to the people who were there. But I did post the crowd, and the sign that said Noah paints. Watch if you want. By the time we checked into our hotel that night, a journalist from the Philadelphia Inquirer had left a voicemail. The Renwick Gallery submission had been a long shot. I'd sent in 3 of Noah's pieces from the fall, the Columbus Maple, the Pittsburgh River, and an earlier painting of Margaret's garden that he'd made the summer after she died. The colors so saturated they almost hurt to look at. I hadn't told Noah I'd submitted them because I didn't want to build expectations around something uncertain. The acceptance email came while we were parked outside a diner outside of Frederick, Maryland, eating sandwiches from the cooler. I read it twice. Then I looked at Noah, who was sketching the diner's sign on a napkin because he'd run out of sketchbook pages somewhere in Delaware. Noah, I need to tell you something. He looked up. You know the paintings you made this fall? The maple, the river, Mom's garden? He nodded. They're going to be shown at a gallery in Washington. A very important gallery. He set the napkin sketch down. How important? One of the most important in the country. He thought about this. Will people be respectful? I smiled. Very respectful. Okay. He picked up the napkin again. Can we go see Mom's garden painting when it's up? Yes, we absolutely can. The Renwick Gallery exhibition opened on a Saturday in late February. The gallery is a 19th century building, a block from the White House. Red brick and arched windows, the kind of building that has absorbed 150 years of people standing in front of things that move them. Noah's 3 paintings were hung in a small alcove off the main corridor, and when we walked in that morning, Noah, in the blue sweater Margaret had given him, me in the only good blazer I own, I stopped in the doorway for a moment and just looked. The maple tree painting was bigger than I remembered. On the gallery wall, lit from above, the colors were almost loud. The river at dusk had a stillness to it that shouldn't have been possible from a photograph and a memory and a folding table on a Philadelphia sidewalk. And Margaret's garden, her actual garden, the marigolds she'd planted every year, because she said they were stubborn and cheerful, and she respected that in a flower, her garden hung in the Renwick Gallery on a Saturday morning, and I had to put my hand on the wall for a 2-second. Noah walked straight up to the garden painting and stood in front of it for a long time. Then he said, quietly, I got her marigolds right. You did, I told him. You really did. The opening drew 400 people. Not all of them knew Noah's story. Some were simply gallery visitors who'd come for the exhibition at large, but many had followed the journey from Ruth's Thanksgiving post through Philadelphia, through the road. Trip videos, And they filled that alcove with a warmth that had nothing performative about it. Genuine people, moved by something genuine. An arts journalist who'd been covering the exhibition asked if she could speak with Noah. I asked Noah first, and he agreed, and he answered her questions with the same direct honesty he always brought to everything. She asked him what he thought about when he painted. He thought about it carefully. "I think about what a thing actually looks like," he said. "Not what you're supposed to think it looks like, just what it really is." She printed that the following week in a piece that ran in the Washington Post arts section. A photograph of Noah standing in front of the maple tree painting, blue sweater, hands in his pockets, completely at ease. The headline read, "He paints what he sees." That's rarer than you think. The Franklin County Children's Services letter was still on my refrigerator at home. I don't know exactly why I kept it there. Maybe because I wanted to see it every morning and remember that we had come through it whole. Maybe because it was proof that the worst thing they could throw at us had landed and done nothing. Marcus called me the week after the Washington Post piece ran. It was the first time we'd spoken since the morning after the live stream, and his voice had the quality of someone who had been thinking about a phone call for a long time before making it. "Dad, I owe you something I don't know how to give you." I said nothing and let him continue. "I owe Noah something too. I've been doing a lot of thinking. About what I did. About what Courtney and I have been about, who I've been toward him. For a long time." A pause. "I don't expect anything. I just needed to say it. I appreciate that," I told him. I meant it too. Not as permission for everything to be fine again immediately, but as the truth. I appreciated that he'd said it, that it had cost him something to say it. "The door isn't closed," I said, "but Noah leads. If and when he wants a relationship with you, you follow his pace. Not Courtney's comfort level. His pace." "Yeah." Marcus was quiet. "Yeah, I understand. I believe he did. I don't know yet what it will amount to. Some things take a very long time. Some things take longer than that. 6 months after Eastside Lutheran, Noah and I have found our rhythm. A small apartment in the short north neighborhood of Columbus, close enough to his favorite park that he can walk there on his own in the mornings, which matters to him enormously. A community of artists, autism families, and people who followed the journey and stayed not as fans but as neighbors. As Dorothy with the Good Brushes friends, as Ruth next door friends. People who see Noah. I've started putting aside a portion of whatever comes in from print sales toward a formal trust for Noah, the kind that will ensure he has housing and support and continuity no matter what happens to me. Ruth helped me find a lawyer who specializes in special needs estate planning. We had our first meeting last month. Noah came with us, asked 3 very specific questions about how the trust worked, and seemed satisfied with the answers. He still paints the maple tree every November. The newest version is the most complex he's ever done, 6 shades of amber, the branches reaching into a sky that somehow looks both cold and warm at the same time. He gave a print of it to Dorothy for Christmas. She cried again. He seemed genuinely puzzled by this. "Why does she cry when she likes it?" he asked me afterward. "Because some things are too big for any other expression," I told him. He thought about this for a while. Then he nodded like that was a reasonable explanation and went to find his brushes. Looking back on everything, the Thanksgiving call, the sweet potato pie, the viral painting, the fake complaints, the road, Washington, the Washington Post, I understand now that the morning Marcus called, I thought my world was narrowing. What I couldn't see yet was that it was actually opening. I spent too many years hoping that people who had already shown me who they were would one day show me something different. I kept Noah small, kept our life small, kept myself patient in a way that wasn't patience at all, but fear that asking for more would cost us the little we were allowed to have. The strangers at Eastside Lutheran, Cecilia in Pittsburgh, the woman with the lived-in face on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, the people who stood in that alcove at the Renwick and saw my son's paintings with their whole attention. These people showed me what it looks like when someone chooses to see another person fully. No asterisk. No qualification. No private conversation about whether he should sit this one out. Real family isn't defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who shows up without being asked, who pulls a chair over, who holds up their phone not to document something viral, but because they want to remember what it felt like to be in that room when something true happened. If you're listening to this and you have a child the world keeps trying to make smaller, stop waiting. Stop adjusting. Stop making yourself and your child fit inside someone else's idea of acceptable. The world is enormous, and most of it is kind, and it is full of people who will stand behind your child with tears on their face and say you have good brushes. You just have to be brave enough to walk through a different door. Noah is in the next room right now, humming something I don't recognize, probably something he made up on the drive home this afternoon. In a few minutes I'll make dinner and he'll come to the table with paint on his hands and tell me something precise and true about something he noticed today, something I walked right past without seeing. And I will listen the way I should have been listening all along.